Oil and America go hand in hand, having a long, firm, and committed relationship. Washington is the addict, and oil is the drug. It constantly needs new hits, and without it, the nation will cease to exist. And so it's willing to go to any length to get its next hit. America uses its massive oil supplies and imports to power its industrial sector and to fuel one of its cultural pillars, the car. America powers almost all of its transport sector using oil. Without it, the country stops. Trucks can't deliver goods and people can't get to their jobs, leading to a collapse of American civilization. So Washington is deeply committed in securing its oil supply and will go to any length to ensure it continues to flow, as its supply is a matter of the highest order of national security. But now it has been shaken. The war in Ukraine has drastically increased global oil prices, and the OPEC production cut has kept it from falling back to pre-war levels. This also comes at a time of high inflation, making oil even more expensive for the American public, leading to high government disapproval. So Washington is keenly interested in reducing the price of oil in the global market and getting it back to a more manageable and controllable price. So it has taken on several major steps to fulfill this goal, but at the same time, it has committed several key mistakes in the process. One of the largest mistakes Washington has made is in regards with its conduct with Saudi Arabia. Joe Biden has personally asked Mohammed bin Salman to increase the country's oil production to decrease the global oil price in the beginning of the year. This request has been refused, and now, recently, following its statement over its wishes to cut global OPEC production of oil by 2 million barrels, Washington has also asked it to postpone its cut and even cancel it. Rida has refused this request as well and had implemented its production cut, which has taken a theoretical 2 million barrels of oil a day off the global oil market, stabilizing the quickly collapsing price. This had directly come against Washington's wishes and requests to Riyadh and had led it to increase its condemnations of Saudi Arabia and even start threatening it, all resulting in the straining of the old relationship. This endangers Washington, since Riyadh is still a key supplier of oil, despite its importance falling in recent years. If Riyadh chooses to halt oil supplies to Washington over its threats and posturing, a great blow will be dealt to Washington, and it's doubtful that it will manage to make a quick and short recovery. So Washington has to tread carefully and quickly de-escalate the situation so it won't suffer for its own actions too harshly. But even with Saudi oil going to America, Washington still pays high, even premium prices for it, and so it has to find new suppliers to reduce this great cost and burden on the American economy. Sadly, oil supplies don't magically appear out of thin air, and Washington is currently stuck with its present suppliers who are already running at peak production, and they simply cannot increase production even further due to a lack of capacity. But thankfully for Washington, new untapped producers still remain, who are all major exporters of oil in their respective regions and can start to augment Washington's thirst for cheap oil immediately. But at the same time, there is a reason why they haven't supplied oil to Washington in recent years. They are all sanctioned by the United States and openly declare themselves as enemies of Washington. This short and cheerful list includes Russia, Venezuela, and Iran, so it may prove problematic for Washington to start importing new cheap oil from those countries, just to put it mildly. Yet, Washington hasn't been dismayed. It has stepped up its efforts to try and gain them as new oil suppliers, despite the many challenges and problematic nature of the nations at hand. But these actions aren't so well thought out and go on to boost the power of the enemy nations, giving them more leverage over Washington to resist and oppose its dominating hand. By granting them the right to provide it with oil, it also grants them the ability to turn this supply off. They have been enemies of Washington for years, so they will go on to utilize this new asset to the benefit and to the harm of Washington. But we still need to look at the viability of each nation and its access and ability to become Washington's latest and greatest oil supplier, since it is in fact relatively seriously considering to hire them as new oil suppliers. We will start off with Venezuela. Venezuela has been under US sanctions for over a decade. Those sanctions, which had kept piling on, had destroyed Caracas' ability to produce oil and export it, with production contracting by two-thirds. This has caused Caracas' once mighty oil facilities and empire to fall into a state of disrepair, making it so that it doesn't even manage to comply to OPEC production quotas. So why can we expect it to fulfill new American requests? Caracas simply cannot produce new oil for Washington. Its manufacturing capacity will have to be rebuilt in a long and costly process, defeating the entire point of easing its sanctions on it, since the oil won't come right now when Washington needs it, and it won't come cheap. So Caracas is off the list, and we move on to the next nation, Russia. Moscow is the originator of this problem in the first place, and trading with it will only rewarded for its heinous actions and crimes. Moscow has attacked Ukraine and stopped supplying most of its oil and gas to Europe due to the sanctions which European nations and Washington have cast upon it. Buying oil from Moscow gives it the money to continue and to fuel and supply its war in Ukraine, in which Washington has a direct and loss taken by supplying Kiev with weapons and training. Giving Moscow money will just make Washington's efforts counterproductive and will undoubtedly be an unpopular political decision in the eyes of the American public, leading and causing mass public outcry. Washington simply cannot allow this to happen, and so it won't trade with Moscow. And so, once again, another country is off the list, leaving us with just one singular country, Iran, in which Washington has made the most amount of attempts to unlock its oil capacity. Washington has been trying to court Tehran since Biden came into office with its efforts to re-implement the JCPOA, which have so far failed. If the JCPOA were to be implemented, Washington will ease sanctions on Tehran, including the ones on its precious oil, and start to import said oil. But there is a fundamental problem with the JCPOA. It gives money to Tehran, which it then goes and invests in its military, proxy groups, weapon development, and production capabilities, producing new weapons and increasing its military might. This newfound military might is directed at American allies such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates and aggressively used against them to target the most critical and important sector, their oil production, reducing their output and destroying their facilities. The problem is that this same oil goes to Washington. So, by signing the JCPOA and starting oil imports from Iran, Washington gives it the money to procure new weapons, which are then in turn dispersed to its proxy groups and used to destroy Allied oil production that goes to power Washington. So, by signing the JCPOA, Washington may actually reduce its total oil imports from the Middle East and increase the price of oil in the global market. So, the JCPOA becomes a counterproductive agreement. In addition to that, Tehran has recently increased its notoriety on the global stage. It has started to supply its weapons to Moscow, aiding its war efforts in Ukraine, allowing it to continue its bombing of civilians and critical infrastructure. Tehran has become a direct accomplice in the Russia-Ukraine war on the side of Moscow, allowing it to further commit and pursue its war crimes in Kiev. As if it wasn't enough, the recent protests in Tehran have been met with its own domestic war crimes by overwhelming brutality at the hands of the regime, arresting thousands of protesters, killing hundreds, and using military grade solutions to put down the protests. These brutal and heinous actions have been met with mass condemnation from the West and even resulted in new sanctions being applied against Tehran. These actions of Tehran have gone on to stall the JCPOA talks for the moment, and it's increasingly looking like they have become stalled or even suspended for a long time. Tehran has showed its true colors once again, and Washington simply cannot allow itself to treat with it. So the JCPOA has become a relative imagination at the heights of Washington and may not be signed for the next couple of years, if not even decades. So Tehran is officially off the list, and without it, all the countries on the list have been crossed out. So, what can Washington do to fulfill its internal thirst, if not to go to new alternative suppliers? What solutions are at its hand? The solutions can be divided into two groups: short term and long term solutions. Washington needs to take care of this problem right now, and so it will be more keenly interested in short term solutions. And so we will start our discussion with them. To start off with, Washington has to fix its relationship with Riyadh. It simply cannot afford to lose Riyadh as an oil supplier, so it has to stop with its wild accusations and threats as to not lose its oil supplies and bring it closer to America's main rival, China. Washington needs to augment its current imports with expanding domestic oil production. It needs to start giving out new drilling permits and encouraging oil companies to set up new drilling operations. It also needs to stop with its blaming and finger pointing to the oil companies for the current high prices, as they are Washington's own fault. It has been attacking their operations with new green bills for years, threatening the sector and eliminating investment out of fear of government stronghanding them into shutting down their production. But when crisis came, Washington came running back to the companies it has previously demonized. So Washington needs to allow them to actually build and operate new oil production and not to shut it down in a few years down the line. This only can be done and accomplished by shifting Washington's talking points and new laws. It has to guarantee domestic oil companies safety of extraction and oil production. Same has to be guaranteed to global oil suppliers to Washington. America will keep buying oil now and in the future. Finally, Washington may utilize the current ongoing protests in Iran to increase its oil production. Washington may use those protesters to create an armed riot against Tehran. It will give them guns and training to turn on against the regime and overthrow it, setting up a new revolution, ending up in a new Islamic Republic favorable towards the West and America. This nation will have to quickly make large amounts of money, and it will utilize its spare production capacity and favorable outlook towards the West and supply America with its desperately needed cheap oil. A win for America and a win for the brave Iranians who are currently protesting against the government. But these are all short-term solutions. The short-term solutions will help Washington, as their name states, in the short term, but oil has always been a crucial risk to Washington, so it needs to implement real long-term steps to minimize this long-term problem. It's important to remember that the problem isn't new. Washington has been dealing with oil shocks for decades, and it hasn't actually implemented long-term solutions to its problem. Now is the time. These long-term solutions will tackle the fundamental problems with oil in America, but they may be too long-term to be realistically implemented by American politicians because the results won't quickly show up as those of the short-term solutions, but they will prove to be much more crucial and have much greater effect on America. So they have to be implemented by Washington. We all need to collectively hope that America won't bury its head in the sand and prioritize only its political gains while ignoring its future. We have to hope that Washington realizes the volatility and the unsecure nature of its oil supply and start a long-term shift from oil. If this miraculously becomes a reality, Washington has two sectors to tackle. As a reminder, Washington needs oil to power its industrial sector and exclusively power its transportation sector. So oil consumption needs to be reduced in both of those sectors. We shall start with the industrial sector, which makes up a quarter of total oil demand in America. It uses a large number of products derived from petroleum, but many of them can be also derived from natural gas. So natural gas may come and replace petroleum's industrial applications, since it can produce almost the same products, but is a far superior form of hydrocarbon energy. The natural gas will have to come from somewhere, and the most likely destination is from the energy sector, where it is used to generate electricity to power American households. But natural gas isn't the best method for electricity generation, with a much better alternative being available on the market for Washington: nuclear energy. Nuclear reactors will take a long time to build, making this solution a long-term one. But once they are built, and as they are built, more natural gas can be redirected to industry as nuclear takes over energy production, phasing out oil from the industrial sector, and even building an energy sector which isn't reliant upon widely fluctuating and costly energy sources, since uranium eliminates all of those problems, being highly energy dense, making it so that negligible amounts of uranium are required to keep the entire sector running, boosting Washington's energy security in the term and the option of a global war breaking out. But of course, the bulk of the problem lies in the transportation sector, which makes up a massive amount of 70% of Washington's entire oil demand and goes to fuel America's favorite pastime, the car. So, to combat this staple of American culture, there needs to come a monumental effort from the government and the states to reduce car usage and encourage rail transport. Washington needs to roll out programs that improve public transportation, build new metros, encourage biking and walkable cities, all in order to reduce the amount of unnecessary car trips people make daily. The current high costs of petrol and gas make for a great environment for providing alternatives to the car, which people may use to save a buck in these hard and economically harsh times. America is also heavily reliant upon its trucks to transport its goods. Many of the current truck routes can be replaced by more energy efficient rail transport that runs off electricity and doesn't burn massive amounts of oil by the hour. These two actions in tandem will reduce the need for car and truck trips, reducing the thirst of large companies and American public for oil and petroleum products, leading to its price falling back to normal levels to be used by the people who actually need it. To wrap up, oil has made America what it is today, but now it's time to transfer away from it to more viable and effective alternatives. Washington has to fix its oil problem or it will continue to hunt it long into the future. Washington has to say goodbye to its favorite substance and move on to more radioactive and workable pastures.